wonderful church fathers, and they were all three good men. Two of them are saints, one is not. But still, even the one who didn't become a saint was still a good man. He made some mistakes in life, but we've all made some mistakes. We're covering today Tertullian, Saint Cyril of Jerusalem, and Saint Athanasius of Alexandria. So we're starting with the earliest of the three, and that is Tertullian. Tertullian lived from about 160 until about 240. St. Jerome tells us that he lived to a ripe old age, so he died very old, which was unusual for the time. Most people didn't live into their 80s, and Tertullian did. Tertullian was born a pagan. He lived in Carthage, North Africa. That was when he spent his whole life. He was a lawyer. That was his profession. And it really comes out in his writings. Yes, you can tell. He's used to arguing in court. That is his... He uses a lot of legal terminology and legal procedure in his writings. Even though he's writing about theology, he still uses the law. The Romans had a very sophisticated body of law, and the Romans were excellent lawyers. They might do something completely unjust and grotesque, but they would tell you it was all done perfectly legally. So you may be being put to death for something you didn't do, but we followed all the procedures. That's the way the Romans were. And he converted in midlife. So I would say maybe around age 30, he converted to the Catholic faith. And he immediately became an apologist for the Catholic faith. Now, we have to stop and understand that in the English language, the word apology has a different meaning than it used to. In the English language, the word apology means to say you're sorry for something you've done that was wrong. That's not the old meaning of the word apology. It comes from the Greek apologia, or apologia, which means to give an explanation. Basically, it means to give an explanation as to why you're right and the other guy is wrong. That's what apologia means. And so he became an apologist. So he was trying to convince pagans why they should become Christian. He was also trying to convince heretics as to why they should come back to the Catholic faith. Tertullian was someone of a little bit of a bad temper. He was not the kind of person that you would sit down to relax with a cup of coffee over a table with. I mean, he was someone you'd want to hire to be a lawyer, but not necessarily to drink coffee with to relax. I mean, he was pretty stern. He was very stern in his thinking. He was very stern in his theology. He tended towards the strictest interpretation of everything. So basically, his philosophy of life was, if it doesn't hurt, then you're doing something wrong. That was the way he thought about life. That's the way he thought about the faith. Was the most difficult thing is the right thing. The hardest thing is the right thing. So as we say, he tended towards rigorism. And throughout most of his life, he stayed Catholic, but some disputes broke out in the church. Now, the disputes it was the same dispute that was always plaguing the church, the early church, and that was, what do you do with people who lapse? So basically, these persecutions flare up once in a while. Keep in mind, it was not one continuous persecution. You would have a period of persecution, then it would go away, then you'd have a few years of peace, then persecution would rise up again, and then it would go away. So there would be periods of persecution and periods of peace. And during the periods of persecution, you would sometimes have people who, they're brought before the judge, and the judge threatens to kill and torture them, and then they cave in and they go ahead and burn incense to Caesar. But then after the persecution's over, they come back to the bishop and say, hey, I want to come back and be absolved and go back to church again. And what the Catholic Orthodox bishop said was, and the Pope agreed with this, was, well, you can come back, but you have to spend, about 5 years doing penance. So, you'll sit at the back of the church, and, you'll ask for prayers, and you can't receive communion. And then after 5 years, then you'll come and receive communion again. Now, here's the problem: is that there were people in the community whose brother, father, mother was tortured and killed rather than burned incense to Caesar, and they did not want to see the lapsee, those who had lapsed, receiving absolution, and so they were saying, no, it's an unforgivable sin. People were saying it's an unforgivable sin. Once someone burns incense to Caesar or to the Roman gods, then it's over for them. It's impossible for them to be forgiven. And so Tertullian really took the position, he began, over time, he began to take the position that certain sins were unforgivable, and like adultery and burning incense to Caesar, or apostasy, as we would say. And he got into a fight with his local bishop about it, and so he joined he left the church. He joined a sect of what was called Montanists. They were very strict people. They believed in fasting. They believed in celibacy. They believed that you shouldn't run away from persecution, because sometimes Christians would do that. If persecution would break out, they would run away. Kind of odd that they would say that, because Jesus himself says, if they persecute you in one city, flee to the next. But anyhow, so they embraced the strictest interpretation possible, and they became a sect. They became a separate body of Christians, and so he joined them for a while. Until, as he got older, he got frustrated because he thought they were too soft. So he broke away from the Montanists and founded his own sect. You could call it the Tertullian sect. And then he died in that state. And later on, St. Augustine reconciled the Tertullianists back into the church. But I don't see Tertullian as an evil man. I see him as someone who suffered from psychological problems. I've met Catholics who are like Tertullian. They really believe that if it doesn't hurt, then you're doing something wrong. And if the most strict interpretation is the only interpretation, and everything's black and white, and everything is. Now, the reason it gets confusing is because there are certain issues on which it is black and white. There are some issues where the strictest interpretation is the right interpretation. But it's just that you can't have this approach to life where everything has to be the most painful possible. Jesus didn't exactly say that. Jesus certainly said on certain issues, definitely, you have to do the hard thing, but not on everything. So I see him as someone who suffered from psychological problems, not as an evil man. And I don't think he went to hell. I think when he died, God said, you really suffer from some severe psychological problems, and that's why things went wrong. But he was a brilliant writer, and in his Catholic phase, he wrote some beautiful, beautiful stuff. Now, it's very harsh, obviously, but it's still very, very beautiful. And in fact, he's our first church father to write in Latin. Before him, all the church fathers wrote in Greek. Now, Tertullian knew Greek, and he wrote in Greek, but none of his Greek writings have survived. So we only have his Latin writings. And he actually invented a lot of the terminology that we use both in English and in Latin. Like, for example, he was the first one to use the word trinitas, which is Trinity. So he was the first one to use the word trinitas. Much of our Latin Catholic vocabulary comes from Tertullian. Which is not to say that the teachings are, of course, go back to Christ, but it's just the word that's used to describe something. He's the one who used the word. So I've taken a couple selections from his many writings. I do advise you to go and read all of his writings when you have a chance. They're beautiful, they're inspiring. Parts of them you say to yourself, I can't possibly live this way. So this is his writing. It's called Ad Nationes, which means to the nations, or to the Gentiles, or to those who don't believe in Christ. And in this particular section, he's trying to convince them that the Christians are not the cause of all the problems in the world. Because, see, what would happen is there would be a famine or an earthquake, and then the pagans would say, well, the gods are mad at us because the Christians aren't worshiping them. So it's the Christians' fault. And Tertullian's saying, no, before Christ was born, there were all sorts of horrible things going on back then, too. So this is a section from his writings on that point. But why should I be astonished at your vain imputations? That's typical. Under the same natural form, malice and folly have always been associated in one body and growth, and have ever opposed us under the one instigator of error. Indeed, I feel no astonishment, and therefore it is necessary for my subject. I will enumerate some instances that you may feel the astonishment by the enumeration of the folly into which you fall, when you insist on our being the causes of every public calamity or injury. If the Tiber has overflowed its banks, if the Nile has remained in its bed, if the sky has been still, or the earth been in commotion, if death has made its devastation, or famine its afflictions, your cry immediately is, "This is the fault of the Christians," as if they who fear the true God could have to fear a like thing, or at least anything else, than an earthquake or famine or such visitations. I suppose it is as despisers of your gods that we call down on us these strokes of theirs. Basically saying we suffer from these things too, when they happen. As we have remarked already, 300 years have not yet passed in our existence. But what vast scourges before that time fell on the world, on its various cities and provinces. What terrible wars, both foreign and domestic. What pestilences, famines, conflagrations, yawnings, and quakings of the earth has history recorded. Where were the Christians then, when the Roman state furnished so many chronicles of its disasters? Where were the Christians when the islands Hira, Anafe, and Delos, and Rhodes, and Saya were desolated with multitudes of men? It's like when earthquakes or hurricanes would destroy the population of an island. Or again, when the land mentioned by Plato, as larger than Asia or Africa, was sunk in the Atlantic Sea. So he's referring to the lost city of Atlantis. Or when the fire from heaven overwhelmed the Volsini, and flames of their own mountain consumed Pompeii. When the Sea of Corinth was engulfed by an earthquake. When the whole world was destroyed by the deluge. Where then were, I will not say the Christians who despise your gods, but where were your gods themselves, who are proved to be of later origin than the great ruin by the very places and cities in which they were born, sojourned, and were buried, and even those which they founded? So he's basically saying, your own gods didn't protect you, because they're not real. And also he's saying, look, there have been disasters and calamities and wars long before Christians came along. So he's saying you can't blame Christians for all of these disasters and all these calamities. Now, Tertullian, in addition to writing against pagans, people who weren't Christian at all, he also spent a lot of time arguing against heretics. And in his Catholic faith, he was very good at it. I know he later became a heretic himself. I don't think he went to hell, but he did. But anyhow, he did become a heretic. In his Catholic faith, he was very good about addressing heresies. And one of the most common heresies in the early church was Docetism. So what was Docetism? Well, Docetism was a Gnostic heresy. Docetism basically believed that matter was bad, matter was evil. And this comes from Hindu and Persian philosophy. It also comes from Plato. See, in the Platonic idea, Plato, by the way, Plato was a good guy. He was a moral man. It's just that he got some things wrong. And he got this point really wrong. But Plato believed that everything that's good is eternal, it's perfect, it's spiritual, and everything that's bad is physical. And he says that when a child is conceived in the womb, what happens is that this happy, loving, free-floating spirit which is living in eternity. He's all happy. And then he gets sucked down and trapped in the body of a child. And so he's trapped there. And he's weighed down by this awful body. And it's not until he dies that the soul can be free again. And in fact, a lot of people use this idea to justify infanticide, because they would say, "Hey, we're just freeing the child's soul, so it can go back, to the eternal light or whatever it was." Now, I don't think Plato would have approved of that, but people use this philosophy to justify things like that. So the Docetists, they were Christians who were heavily influenced by Platonic philosophy and by Gnosticism. And so they thought the flesh, matter, the body was bad. And so they couldn't imagine, they just could not imagine that the Son of God could come down and take on human flesh. Because why would he do that? Basically in their mind, why would he become a pig? Why would a human become a pig? That's what they would say. Why would a human become a pig? He just wouldn't do it. So why would God, this pure spirit, why would he take on this garbage of flesh? And so what they said was, Jesus only appeared to have a body. He didn't really have a body. It was a fake body. It was just an image. Or what they said was, it was made of the elements of the stars. It was star flesh. Okay, So, So it was like, they just could not imagine that the Son of God would actually take on real human flesh, a real body. They just could not believe that. So he wrote a book called On the Flesh of Christ, where he's arguing against this heresy of the Docetists. And so I have a section from that. This is my favorite book of Tertullian. And this is, I hope you forgive me, it's a rather long section, but it's just worth it because it's so full of wonderful Tertullian slashing against this awful heresy. Yeah, sometimes heresy deserves a beating, and he gives it. Okay. On the flesh of Christ. There are, to be sure, other things also quite as foolish as the birth of Christ, which have reference to the humiliations and sufferings of God. Or else let them call a crucified God wisdom. But Marcion will apply the knife to this doctrine also, and even with greater reason. For which is more unworthy of God, which is more likely to raise a blush of shame, that God should be born, or that he should die, that he should bear the flesh or the cross, be circumcised or be crucified, be cradled or be coffined, be laid in a manger or in a tomb. Talk of wisdom. You will show more of that if you refuse to believe this also. But after all, you will not be wise unless you become a fool to the world, by believing the foolish things of God. Have you then cut away all sufferings from Christ? See, they couldn't imagine that Christ really suffered, so they said that was all fake. Jesus was faking suffering. Yeah. This is what they believed. Have you then cut away all sufferings of Christ on the ground that, as a mere phantom, he was incapable of experiencing them? We have said above that he might possibly have undergone the unreal mockeries of an imaginary birth and infancy. But answer me at once, you that murder truth. Was not God really crucified? And having been really crucified, did he not really die? And having indeed really died, did he not really rise again? Falsely did Paul determine to know nothing among us but Jesus and him crucified. So he's basically saying, if you're right, then it means St. Paul is a liar. Because St. Paul says, I preach Christ and Christ crucified. So if he wasn't really crucified, then what is Paul saying? Paul's lying. Falsely has he impressed, says Paul, I lost my place. Falsely has he impressed upon us that he was buried. Falsely inculcated that he rose again. False, therefore, also is our faith. And all that we hope for from Christ will be a phantom. O you most infamous of men, who acquitted of all guilt the murderers of God, for nothing did Christ suffer from them, if he really suffered nothing at all. Spare the whole world's one only hope, you who are destroying the indispensable dishonor of our faith. So basically he's saying, if Christ didn't really suffer, then means we're not really saved. So you're basically saying none of us are saved. None of us are going to go to heaven. Whatsoever is unworthy of God is of gain to me. I am safe, if I am not ashamed of my Lord. Whoever says he shall be ashamed of me, of him will I also be ashamed. Other matters for shame find I none which can prove to me to be shameless in a good sense, and foolish in a happy one, by my own contempt of shame. The Son of God was crucified. I am not ashamed, because men must needs be ashamed of it. And the Son of God died. It is by all means to be believed, because it is absurd. And he was buried and rose again. The fact is certain, because it is impossible. Basically, what he's saying is that people wouldn't make this up. If the apostles were going to lie, they would lie in a way that people would be something that people would easily believe. But when you are preaching, well, my Lord was killed, then rose from the dead, that's not something you would just make up. That's not something that you would. That's not a lie you would construct, because you would construct a lie to be believed, not to be mocked. But how will all this be true in him, if he was not himself true? If he really had not in himself that which might be crucified, might die, might be buried, and might rise again? I mean this flesh suffused with blood, built up with bones, interwoven with nerves, entwined with veins, a flesh which knew how to be born and how to die, human without doubt, as born of a human being. It will therefore be mortal in Christ, because Christ is man and the Son of Man. Else why is Christ man and the Son of Man, if he has nothing of man and nothing from man, unless it be either that man is anything else than flesh, or man's flesh comes from any other source than man, or Mary is anything else than a human being, or Marcion's man is as Marcion's God. Otherwise, Christ could not be described as being man without flesh, nor the Son of Man without any human parent. Just as he is not God without the Spirit of God, nor the Son of God without having God for his Father. Thus, the nature of the two substances displayed him as man and God, in one respect born, in the other unborn, in one respect fleshly, in the other spiritual, in one sense weak, in the other exceeding strong, in one sense dying, in the other living. This property of the two states, the divine and the human, is distinctly asserted with equal truth of both natures alike, with the same belief, both in respect of the Spirit and of the flesh. The powers of the Spirit proved him to be God. His sufferings attested the flesh of man. If his powers were not without Spirit, in like manner were not his sufferings without flesh. Okay, so then he goes on and he comes to this part. A phantom too it was, of course, and he's mocking them. He's not saying Jesus was a phantom, he's mocking their position. A phantom too it was, of course, after the resurrection, when showing his hands and his feet for the disciples to examine, he said, Behold and see that it is I myself, for a spirit has not flesh and bones, as you see me have. So basically, this I think is one of the most powerful arguments that Tertullian uses. He's saying that after the resurrection of Christ, if you remember, Jesus, he went up to his apostles, and the apostles thought he was a ghost. And he said, no, give me something to eat. So he took a fish and he ate it. Then he said, come and touch me. And then he said, see, I have flesh and I have bone, and I ate and know that a ghost does not eat, a ghost does not have flesh and not bone. So Tertullian is saying, are you saying Jesus is a liar? Are you saying Jesus is a liar? When he told them he had flesh and he had bone after he rose from the dead, and that he was not a ghost, that he was a real human, Jesus was telling the truth. And it's blasphemy to say he was lying. So that, I think, is the most powerful argument that Tertullian has. So Tertullian, I don't have time to go over all of his writings, but he argues, he gets some things wrong, but he argues very well for the Orthodox faith while he was a Catholic. And even when he fell into heresy, it was not a heresy that denied the divinity of Christ. It was not a heresy that denied the humanity of Christ. It was not a heresy that denied the sacraments. It was none of that. The heresy was one of when and how should we forgive people who have apostatized. So it was just his rigorism. It was just his harshness that was taking over his mind. We'll meet some much worse heretics in this class than Tertullian. Tertullian, I mean, as bad as he was, falling into Montanism, he never denied the divinity of Christ like someone else will in this lecture. Okay, so I recommend that you go and read all Tertullian's writings when you have a chance. So now we're going to shift to Cyril and Athanasius, who were contemporaries. They lived roughly the same time.
What's his name again?
Cyril. Oh, you mean the first guy?
No, this guy. How do you spell it?
Cyril, Cyril, and then Athanasius is spelled Athanasius.
Athanasius.
Yeah.
What about Tertullian on here on the spelling?
I didn't even think, it didn't even cross my mind to think about how to spell his name. Okay, Tertullian is Tertullian. Tertullian. Okay. Sure. Okay, so before I get into Cyril and Athanasius, I just want to give a little bit of the political situation that was going on. So we're looking at the late 200s, and Diocletian is emperor. Diocletian was the worst persecutor of Christians that the Roman Empire ever saw. He tried to stamp out Christianity, and he tried to do it with blood, just killing people. And so he made it illegal to be a Christian in the Roman Empire. And he also tried to make it so that whenever you went to the marketplace to buy anything, even a loaf of bread, you had to pour a little bit of incense into a tiny, they made these little miniature, what do you call them, incense burners, a little bit of coal in it. And you had to take a little bit of incense and then pour it in there and then buy your loaf of bread, okay, or whatever it was. So he tried to make it so that you couldn't even buy anything without worshiping the emperor, because he knew Christians would not worship the emperor. So he tried everything, and thousands upon thousands of Catholics were killed by Diocletian. But he failed. There were simply too many Christians. There were too many people converting to the Catholic faith, and too many Christians were having babies. So he just couldn't. I mean, he tried, but he just could not. But he was the last great persecutor of the Catholic faith. Now, politically, Diocletian, he recognized that the empire had gotten really, really big. Now remember, this is long before email, long before the telephone. So if you're in Judea and you send a letter to the emperor who happens to be in Spain, visiting Spain, it will take 3 months for that letter to get to him. So if something's going wrong in Judea, I mean, Diocletian doesn't hear about it for 3 months. And so he finally says, okay, the empire is too big. So we're going to split the empire in half. And there will be an eastern half and a western half. And both will have an emperor. But he also knew that there was often political turmoil over the succession. So over when an emperor died, there was sometimes a civil war over who would be the next emperor. So he said, okay, and both emperors have to appoint someone as their successor while they're alive. So that when they die, their successor takes over, and so there's no civil war. So this was his idea. And he reigned as Eastern Emperor for a while, and then finally he said, okay, I'm retiring. He's one of the only emperors in history to retire. And would you believe it? He retired to his home villa where he grew onions. That was his hobby, was growing onions. Yeah, and well, he liked it. He liked it. So this brutal murderer of Christians, this monomaniac, you would think he'd be like Hitler or something. He'll never give up power. No, that's not what he did. He retired and grew onions. And so he was around for a long time in his little villa, while the rest of the world was just moving in vastly different directions. So basically what happened was, the guy who became emperor in the West, I can't remember his name, I think it may have been Constantius, and he had a son named Constantine. Constantine was the leader, he was the general of the Roman legions in Britain, Great Britain today. So Constantius died, and the legions in Britain, they all said, "Hail Constantine, he's the new emperor." Well, he wasn't supposed to become the emperor, it was supposed to be someone else. Well, Constantine said, "Well, okay, that's fine, I'll become the emperor then, but there's a problem, I have to go defeat this other guy who's also claiming to be emperor." I think his name was Maxinius. I don't think he was supposed to be emperor either, so there's just these two, both of them, neither of them were meant to be emperor. So he wages war against, like I said, I can't remember his name exactly, I think it was Maxinius. Maxinius. So he wages war against Maxinius, and he defeats him in a couple of battles. And the final battle was the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, also called the Battle of Red Rocks. And Constantine didn't actually kill Maxinius. Maxinius fell off the bridge into the river and drowned. So that was probably politically convenient for Constantine. Because he didn't have to kill anyone. He didn't have to kill him. So he moves into Rome, and he declares himself to be the new emperor of the western half of the Roman Empire. So he's not going to be the emperor of the whole empire, just the western half. And he writes a letter to Diocletian saying, "Oh yes, by the way, I'm emperor, so please send me the purple robes." Diocletian, of course, well, not Diocletian, but the guy who succeeded Diocletian in the east, was furious with Constantine. He was like, "You beg." But he sent the robes anyway, just for the sake of peace. Now Constantine, here's the thing about Constantine, is that his mother was a Christian. He was not a Christian. His father was not a Christian, but his mother was. His mother was Helen. And so he already was very familiar with the Christian religion. And the night before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he saw a vision in the sky of the cross. And in Latin, there were these words, "In hoc signo vinces," "in this sign you will conquer." And so he thought to himself, "Oh my, the Christian God is speaking to me, so he's going to give me victory." So he had all the Romans paint the cross on their shields. So they went into battle bearing the Christian standard. And he won. So he became convinced that the Christian God must be the true God. Now, he didn't become Christian right away. He delayed that for like 25, 30 years. And the reason why is because if you would have asked him, I think he would have said, "Well, I still have a lot of sinning to do."
Save me, but not right now.
Yeah, save me, but not right now. So he delayed his baptism until his deathbed. He did become a Christian on his deathbed, but he put it off. But he did believe the Christian God was a true God, or maybe the true God. His private beliefs are kind of difficult to tease out at this point in his life, but he certainly believed that there was a God, at least, who was the Christian God. And so he forges an alliance with the Emperor of the East, who I think was Licinius. Now, I know you guys will go back home and get on Wikipedia and find out that I was wrong. I just know that. But anyhow, so he forges an alliance with Licinius in the East. And then they meet at Milan in Italy, and they published the Edict of Milan. The Edict of Milan did not abolish paganism. All it said was everyone can worship their own religion in their own way. So Christianity became legal, but it did not become the official religion of the Roman Empire, and it did not abolish paganism. So Christianity was now a legal religion. Now, so he did not abolish paganism, but Constantine still favored Christians. So he would only hire Christians as bureaucrats. So you're a pagan, well, just go back home. Oh, you're a Christian? Okay, I'll hire you. So people got the message. If you want to rise in the court, you need to become a Christian. Now, the thing is, at this time, lots of people were becoming Christian anyway. There was just there was a momentum. There was just this powerful momentum of people turning away from paganism and becoming Christian. And within 100 years, actually, the whole empire would be Christian. So, after a while, Licinius stayed pagan. So Constantine favors Christians, Licinius favors pagans. Well, Licinius gets irritated with Christians, and so he starts persecuting Christians. And then Constantine says, I can't tolerate this, so he goes on crusade, I guess you could say, and he defeats Licinius, and puts him in prison, and then later on he kills him. But then he becomes emperor of the whole empire, both east and west. And he decides, in fact, to make Constantinople the new capital. So it's no longer Rome. Now the new capital of the whole empire is Constantinople. And Constantine, like I said, not technically a Christian yet, but he is promoting Christianity. He thinks Christianity will become a glue that will hold the whole empire together. And that seems to be working well until this wacko comes along who starts this huge controversy among Christians. And that guy's name was Arius. So, who was Arius and what did he believe? Well, Arius was from Libya, what today is Libya. And he moved to Alexandria, Egypt. Now, Arius was an opponent of the Sabellian heresy. Sabellianism, it denied the humanity of Christ. So it's saying Jesus is all God, but he's not man. Well, Arius thought this was horrible, so he attacked Sabellianism. But he went in the opposite direction. He began to believe, well, Jesus is the best man, but he's not God. And so basically what Arius believed was very strange. He believed that he had God the Father, who was God by himself, and then within time, he begot the Son. So the Son is a creature of the Father. He's not equal to the Father. He's not of the same substance as the Father. He's not one with the Father. He is separate. He is a creature. Now, he is the best creature, as he would say. Jesus is the greatest, the best, the most awesome, the most wonderful. Jesus is the best creature, but still a creature. And so Jesus, the Son, the Son became human and died on the cross and saved everybody. And so he's trying to say that Jesus is the supreme human. Jesus is the best human. Jesus is the best creature of God, but he's not God. As he would say, he is not of the same substance as the Father. And he began promoting his idea. And he was a very clever man. He was a smart man. It's so awful how so many times in history awful people are very smart. But he was a very smart man. What he did, you wouldn't believe this, is he took bar songs. You know those songs that people will sing in bars, and quite often they have body lyrics, but they're catchy and people like them. So he took those tunes and he took out the lyrics and he replaced them with his own lyrics. So the tune was the same, but it was now saying something like, "And the Son was not of the same substance as the Father. He's the greatest human, but not God." I mean, just whatever it was. But he converted his theology into these bar songs of all things, and was using that to promote his heresy. Well, as you can imagine, this caused a huge controversy among Catholics and Christians, and it was just crazy. But I can't go further into it until I get to St. Athanasius. So we'll go back to Arius when I get to St. Athanasius. For now, we're going to talk about Cyril of Jerusalem. So he's living during this time with the conversion of Constantine, with legalization of Christianity, and with Arius causing trouble. Now, with Cyril of Alexandria, Cyril of Jerusalem, I'm sorry, he was Bishop of Jerusalem. And he was a very holy man, very good man. And he strikes me as someone who was not a Thomas Aquinas, so he was not the most brilliant light you could imagine. And he was, during the huge controversy between Arianism and Catholicism, it seems he didn't quite know which one was right. This is a lesson for all of us. Someone can be holy and still confused. Someone can be a holy man and still not know what the answer is to a certain debate. It's like, and he was one of them. So, and you have to imagine there were lots of Christians just like him. And, because he's sitting in his little hut, and one bishop over here is saying Jesus is not God, another bishop over there is saying Jesus is God, and a lot of people who are just kind of like, I just don't know. They're both really nice bishops. I see them both praying the rosary. They didn't have the rosary back then, but whatever it was, I see them both doing the adoration. They both seem to be holy. They both read the Bible, and I don't know which one's right. So he was one of those. He for the first part of his life, he didn't know which side was right, and so in his homilies, he didn't quite come down one side or the other. Now the good news is, towards the end of his life, he realized the Catholic position was the right position, and he swore to the decrees of Nicaea. So he ended coming down on the Orthodox side, and he ended in the church. So that's why he is a saint, Saint Cyril of Jerusalem. Now he wrote lots of his homilies down, but I just have a selection from the first one, which I want to read to you. Now what this is he's speaking to the people about to be baptized on Easter Vigil. Have any of you guys been to Easter Vigil? You see people come forth to be baptized. Well, this is that moment. So we have all these people here, and they're about to be baptized, and he is preaching to them about the wonderful, wonderful thing that they're going to receive at their baptism. Disciples of the New Testament and partakers of the mysteries of Christ, as yet by calling only, but ere long by grace also, make you a new heart and a new spirit, that there may be gladness among the inhabitants of heaven. For if over one sinner that repents there is joy according to the gospel, how much more shall the salvation of so many souls move the inhabitants of heaven to gladness? As you have entered upon a good and most glorious path, run with reverence the race of godliness. For the only begotten Son of God is present here, most ready to redeem you, saying, Come unto me, all that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. You that are clothed with the rough garments of your offenses, who are holden with the cords of your own sins, hear the voice of the prophet saying, Wash you, make you clean, put away your iniquities from before my eyes, that the choir of angels may chant over you. Blessed are they whose iniquities are forgiven, and whose sins are covered. You who have just lighted the torches of faith, guard them carefully in your hands unquenched, that he who erewhile on this all-holy Golgotha opened the paradise to the robber on account of his faith, may grant to you to sing the bridal song. If any here is a slave of sin, let him promptly prepare himself through faith for the new birth to freedom and adoption. And having put off the miserable bondage of his sins, and taken on him the most blessed bondage of the Lord, so may he be counted worthy to inherit the kingdom of heaven. Put off by confession the old man, which waxes corrupt after the lust of deceit, that you may put on the new man, which is renewed according to knowledge of him that created him. Get you the earnest of the Holy Spirit, through faith, that you may be able to be received into the everlasting habitations. Come for the mystical seal, that you may be easily recognized by the Master. Be numbered among the holy and spiritual flock of Christ, to be set apart on his right hand, and inherit the life prepared for you. Now that is so, so beautiful. So,
What is that from again?
the first lecture of Saint Cyril of Jerusalem. So all of his lectures are the homilies that he gave over a 12 or 15-year period to the catechumens right before they're baptized. So they're all catechumen, they're all baptismal homilies. Now, I don't know why they didn't write down some of the other homilies he gave. He obviously did throughout the year. But for whatever reason, whoever his secretary was, he loved those baptismal homilies. So he wrote them all down. He wrote them all down. He loved them. And because that's how it worked back then, was you didn't have a tape recorder, but you would have what's called an amanuensis, whatever it is, a secretary. And he would be sitting there and he would be writing down what you were saying. And that's how it was done back then. Because obviously while the bishop is preaching, you can't be writing while he's preaching. So he has someone on the side writing it all down. Okay, so I encourage you, if you want more of just that beautiful, beautiful exegesis of Scripture and of theology, go and read all, I think there's 12, go and read all 12 of his baptismal lectures. And they're just so full of beauty and glory.
Where do you find those?
Let's see here.
I know.
I'll write it down for you.
That would be awesome.
Yes. Everything I use, I take from this website. It always goes dry when I need it. Okay.
You?
And then when you go there, then there's a tab for fathers. And you'll see the alphabetical listing of the fathers with their writings underneath their names.
Oh,
So yeah. Yes.
And what what's the timeline here? I mean, what year are we talking about?
Okay, for Cyril?
And starting with where you went back, because you mentioned Christians and Catholics separately, and I didn't know if this was Lutheran or...
Oh, this is long before the Reformation of Martin Luther. So Martin Luther would be 1517.
Right.
Okay. Now Tertullian, who I talked about first, he lived from about 160 to about 240. Okay. Now, and the time period we're talking about now is the early 300s. So from about 300 to about 3. So in my lecture now, I'm in the area from about 300 to about 365. That's the kind of time period we're looking at.
So when you said Christians and Catholics, was there any reason to differentiate the two?
There is a slight reason because you had the Catholic faith, which is the true faith, but you had these offshoots who were heretical groups, but they were still Christian because they still believed Jesus was God.
Like the Montanists?
Like the Montanists.
Okay.
And a lot of them were not evil people. Like I said, there were people whose brother was burned at the stake for not worshiping Caesar, and then he sees someone who did worship Caesar coming up to communion. He got really ticked off about that. You know, you can kind of understand that. But when I say Catholic, I mean a member of the authentic, central Christian body. A Christian can be either a heretic or a Catholic. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to focus on Saint Athanasius, who is an awesome saint. Great guy. Oh yes.
Cyril of Athanasius is the same one.
No, this is so Cyril. I'm done with Cyril. Now I'm going on to Athanasius. Athanasius is Athanasius. And he lived from about 296 to 373. Okay. So, Athanasius. Athanasius was born in Alexandria. Alexandria was the biggest city of the Roman Empire. It also had the most diverse population. You think diversity is a cool idea now? It was pretty cool back then too. You had Jews, you had Christians, you had pagans, you had heretical groups, you had Catholics. It was just all mixed together. You had Egyptian speakers and Greek speakers and Latin speakers, and they all were living in Alexandria. And Alexandria also had the biggest library in the world. So if any book you wanted to read, you could go find it. And so Athanasius was born and grew up in that high-pitch atmosphere. He was born to Catholic parents. Athanasius was never a tall man. Also, all of our sources say that he was a rather short guy, pretty short. And which actually comes in handy for him later on. I'll tell you about that later. But so he was a short guy, but even as a young man, he became a deacon, and he became a kind of the secretary and right-hand man of the bishop of Alexandria. He was passionate about orthodoxy, so he hated heresy. He wanted more than anything to love God and to love the truth of God. So he hated heresy, which was a good thing because he was a brilliant mind and he knew how to argue against heretics. So basically, we're going back to Arius now. So Arius is running around causing this firestorm. And what happens is he goes to a city and he stays there until the local bishop gets sick of him and threatens to excommunicate him. And then he goes to the next bishop and, hangs out with him. And he's always going towards bishops who like him, bishops who like his theology. So that's what he's doing. And he does a lot of writing. He writes songs, like I said. And so he's causing this huge firestorm, and people are just arguing about it all over the empire. And when I say arguing, I mean really arguing. There are real fist fights breaking out over this issue. People really are picking up clubs and attacking each other over whether Jesus is God or not God. I mean, it's getting that intense. And now Constantine, as you can tell, he's not a theologian. He does not know what any of this means. And all he wants Christianity to be united so that it can be glue for the empire. And he's like, I want my empire to be Christian. I want everyone to be Christian so that we're all united. And so what is going on? And he doesn't understand all these arguments about being of one substance of the Father or not. That means nothing to Constantine. And it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But so he says, okay, well, let's have a council. Let's have a church council. So he decrees, we're going to have a council, and we're all going to get together, all the bishops going to get together, and we're going to debate this issue. So they have it in Nicaea, what today is Turkey. I keep forgetting that I say these words, but I don't know that I don't say how to spell them. Nicaea, which today is in Turkey. So everyone goes to Nicaea. Now the Pope was too old to go, so he sent just a couple of representatives. And everyone gathers in Nicaea. And Athanasius, he's not a bishop, but he is a deacon, and he is the secretary to the Bishop of Alexandria. And Athanasius, as young as he is, and even though he's only a deacon, he becomes the voice of orthodoxy at the Council of Nicaea. So he goes into the Council of Nicaea, and he says, don't listen to all of this garbage. I'm paraphrasing, but it's basically what he said. Don't listen to this garbage. Jesus is God, the Son of God, and he is only begotten of the Father, and he is of one substance with the Father. And he quotes all the scripture texts that prove that, like when Jesus says, "The Father and I are one." And also when Thomas he doubted Christ, and when he met him, he fell on his knees and worshipped him and said, "My Lord and my God." Okay, so once again, Jesus being worshipped as God. And so he brought all this out, and they argued, they debated for days and days, and of course Constantine he's actually present there. He is sitting at the council, and he doesn't understand any of it. He doesn't understand any of these debates. He's never read the Bible before, for one thing. So he's just sitting there clueless while the bishops start throwing eggs at each other. By the way, one of the bishops present was Saint Nicholas, who is the inspiration for Santa Claus. He is the inspiration for Santa Claus. And the reason he's the inspiration for Santa Claus is because he gave gifts. He gave gifts to people. So that's why he was famous for giving gifts, and that's why he became Santa Claus. And St. Nicholas got so mad at Arius that he actually ran up to Arius and punched him in the mouth. Yes, that really happened. And of course, Constantine had him arrested and thrown in jail. And he didn't die in jail. He was released a few days later. But so you can tell your grandkids or kids that Santa Claus once punched Arius. Yes. So things like that were really happening. So they had a vote, and it came out to something like 273 against 3. And Arius was one of the 3 who voted. So Arius and 2 bishops who were with him voted to say that Jesus was not God, and 275 voted to say Jesus really was God. So it was a powerful victory for Orthodoxy. And it's interesting, they made up a new Greek word. Yes, that's what it means in English. Consubstantial. But I have my eraser. Oh my. Here we go. They made up a new Greek word. Okay? In English, like you said, in English it means consubstantial. Okay, now in the Greek, now this word had never, was not used in common Greek. So people didn't sit down and use this Greek word over lunch in the Greek cafes. It just didn't happen. It was a new word. And the word was homoousios. Yeah. Homoousios, which means of one substance. Okay? And they condemn the opposite, which is homoiousios, which means like. So Arius was saying the Son is like the Father. That's homoiousios. And they condemn that. So that's heresy. The Orthodoxy is this new term which they made up, which the term was new, but the idea was old. The idea is when Jesus said, the Father and I are one, okay? That is the idea. So they weren't making up a new idea, they were just making up a new word to put onto that idea. And that new word was homoousios. Jesus, the Son, is of one substance with the Father. Okay? Now, you would think that that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. Arius wasn't going anywhere. Now, Arius was banished to a small island somewhere. But here's the thing. Even if you're banished to a small island, you can still write letters. That's what he did. And so, by the way, Athanasius goes back home and his bishop dies, and he becomes the new bishop of Alexandria. And he is bishop of Alexandria for the next 40 years. And Athanasius probably thought, he probably popped open his champagne and said, oh man, I'm glad that's over. But guess what? It wasn't. The Arian heresy was not done. Because Arius, being the sly, slick, disgusting heretic that he was, he simply started slowly wooing Constantine. And he wooed the women of his court and his wife and the courtiers. And he slowly, over time, he slowly got himself out of exile. And then he got Athanasius exiled. So what happened for the next 40 years? What happened for the next 40 years is basically it was a question of who was emperor and who was pope. And if there was a good pope and a good emperor, then Athanasius was in Alexandria doing bishop things, fighting heresy, preaching, baptizing, doing all that. If you had a bad emperor who was an Arian, well then he was out somewhere. He couldn't stay in the city because what they said was if you come into the city, we'll kill you, literally. Okay, and so he spent a lot of time in Gaul, spent a lot of time in Turkey, he spent a lot of time in the Egyptian desert. Now, why did he go there? Because that's where the monks were. He loved the monks. He loved monasticism. So when things got bad in Alexandria, he would run away and go hide with the monks in the desert. And even though it was bad for Athanasius, his exiles were good for us, because when he was in some cave somewhere in Egypt or in someone's house in Gaul, France, and he had nothing to do, what did he do? He wrote. Okay, he wrote his books. He wrote his letters, and so it was during his exile periods that he wrote all of his stuff, all of his letters, and. I have some good stories, true stories about Athanasius. And we'll just talk about how fascinating he is. Okay, so After Constantine died, a new guy became emperor. I think his name is Constantius, and he was an Arian, and he was trying to get Athanasius hung. So he decided that we're going to trump up all these charges against Athanasius, and have him tried by a synod of bishops in Libya, and then have him put to death or exiled, whatever it was that they were planning on doing. So something permanent to get him out of the picture. And it's kind of funny. So some of the charges were typical charges against the bishop. You know, well, he didn't say mass right, and he gave money to a heretic, and you know, he is a heretic. That's typical stuff that you charge against the bishop. Then they threw in this other one, and he kidnapped a monk and chopped up his body and used his body parts for black magic. I'm not joking. That was one of the charges actually leveled against Athanasius. If you can imagine, it was like, I mean, they were really going overboard with what they were, the charges they were lying against him. So what Athanasius did when he went to trial was he got the monk that supposedly he killed. He didn't kill him. The monk was still alive. And now, according to the charge, he had cut off the monk's hand and used it for black magic. So at the synod, when he was being tried, this monk shows up with one of his hands hidden in his robe. So everyone was thinking, oh my, so he's alive, but he's hiding his hand. Maybe he got and just cut off his hand and used it for black magic, but didn't actually kill him. So the monk was there, and then the monk very slowly pulled out his hand. I still have both my hands, and so that particular charge against Athanasius was just blown out of the water. So, and by the way, the synod found him guilty. Of course, they found him guilty, not of killing this poor monk because he was still alive, obviously, but for everything else, he was found guilty. And yet, Athanasius had to run away again to hide. And one time, like I said, he was a short guy. One time, the emperor's troops were after him, and Athanasius ran to this room with all these monks in it. And in the room, there was this big and tall monk, and Athanasius was a short guy. So what the monk did was he picked up his robe and put it over Athanasius. So Athanasius was hiding under the monk's robe. And so the soldiers come in and say, we just saw Athanasius run in here. Where is he? And they didn't find him. And there's another story, a true story. So remember, he lives in Egypt. So he was on the river Nile in a boat, trying to get away from the emperor's troops, who were also in a boat. They were chasing him. This was early morning, before dawn. And so Athanasius' friends are rowing and rowing, trying to get away from the emperor's troops. And it's foggy and everything. And Athanasius says, I have an idea. Stop and turn around. And they say, Athanasius, that's stupid. I mean, they're coming towards us. You want to turn around and go towards them? He says, don't worry, I have a plan. So they turn around. And now they're coming towards the emperor's boat. And the emperor's troops, it's real foggy, and they can't see real well. All they see is this boat coming towards them, and this guy standing on the prow of the boat. And they shout out and they say, we're chasing Athanasius. Have you seen him? And Athanasius shouts back, he's very close. If you row real fast, you'll catch up with him. And so then I know he didn't lie. And then they pass him, and they pass him, trying to chase him, and so he gets away. He always gets away. You could make a TV show about Athanasius and all his many adventures. Now on Netflix they have all these 45, 300 episode shows. You could do one on Athanasius. That'd be great. So Athanasius, he spends the next 40 years. He spends 40 years of his life just battling the Arian heresy, and it's a miserable time. The Arian heretics were mean, they were sly, they were clever, they used all the political machinations, and there was a period of time when the Arian heretics hit gold, because there was a weak pope and a very mean Arian emperor, Valens. Okay, he was the worst of the Arian emperors. Now the weak pope was Liberius. No, he was not a heretic. But he was weak. He didn't have the stomach to fight against heresy. And so one time Liberius was in prison and possibly being tortured. So you can't. We talk about papal infallibility. Well, papal infallibility does not extend to the Pope being tortured. The Pope has to be free to speak. So anyhow, so possibly being tortured, they had him sign this ambiguous document. So it can be interpreted one way and it can be interpreted another way too. Okay? So Liberius went ahead and signed that under pressure, probably being threatened with torture. So we have a weak Pope. And then we have this very powerful, very mean Arian emperor named Valens. And Valens, of course, has no problem killing Catholics. He is more than willing to kill Catholics to promote the Arian heresy. Now, that was the absolute low point for the Catholic faith. It looked like the Arians were winning. It looked like, you know, they were going to take over the papacy. It looked like they were going to take over. They already had the emperor, and the emperor was killing Catholics left and right. So it looks like Arianism was going to win. But then two things happened. Liberius happened to die, and then a good pope was elected after him, Damasus, who was firm against heresy. Like I said, Liberius never officially taught heresy. He was just a very weak guy, not the kind of guy you want to be pope. And then Valens got into a battle with the barbarians, and he died too. And so we got a really good pope, and then after Valens was someone who reigned for a short time. Then after that was Theodosius. Theodosius was a very good emperor, and he was Catholic, and he promoted and defended the Catholic faith. And this was towards the end of Athanasius' life. So finally, at the end of his life, after seeing the Arians almost win, after seeing the Arians almost take over the papacy, almost destroy the Catholic faith, he finally sees a good pope and a good emperor. And I think in his old age, sitting in Alexandria, he finally just said, I am done. I am done. After 40 years of battling the Arian heresy, he finally saw it defeated. It wasn't completely defeated. There were still barbarians running around. There were still heretics running around, Arian heretics. But they had lost the main battle. And so finally, as an old man, he died. He was one of the few, in the early church, most saints were martyrs. He was one of the few non-martyr saints. So he died of old age in his bed. And now I didn't quote any of his writings because he just wrote too much, you know. But I thought his story of his life would be more instructive and more fun to tell. But I do encourage you to go to NewAdvent.org and actually read all of his writings. He wrote lots of wonderful stuff. Mostly against the Arians. And that's the bulk of his writings, is why Arians are evil and why, you know, Jesus is God. Okay, now, I used almost all my time. Do we have any questions? Yes?
When they changed wording in the liturgy about the Nicene Creed about 5 years ago, it was English, it was one in being, and they changed it to consubstantial. Is that correct or not?
Yes. And they basically mean the same thing.
Yeah, that's
But-
what, yeah, one in being.
One in being means consubstantial.
It was a word, it didn't change the meaning.
It didn't change the meaning,
That's
no.
what I thought.
Well, here's the thing, what I think about. One is the Anglo-Saxon way of saying it, the
Yeah.
other is the Latin way of saying it.
Yeah, an Anglo-Saxon wants to use four-letter words.
Yeah, one in
Greek wants
being,
to use big words.
yes.
Uh,
So they didn't change the meaning, they just changed
They
from
changed it
Anglo-Saxon
from
to,
something that you could understand to something you couldn't understand, but it was correct.
you know what Pope Benedict, if Pope Benedict was asked about that, what he would say is, I know the people don't understand that word, that's why the priest has to explain that word in his
Trying to get the priest to.
Yeah. Yes. In fact, it's interesting, at Trent, they were debating whether or not to keep Latin in the liturgy or to go to the vernacular. They decided to keep the liturgy in Latin, but they said, okay, we know the people of God don't understand the Latin words, but the priest has to explain it to them in his homily. That's what so.
It did have the advantage that all the other languages had consubstantial.
Yes.
English was the only one that was using
Yes.
one in being.
Mhm.
It's consubstantialum in the missal, right? I mean, in the Roman rite, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's closer.
Any other questions?
Well, mine was kind of based on that's where the Nicene Creed came from, that once they had the vote taken.
Oh yeah, Nicaea was 325. 325. There was in one of the seminaries, there was this very heavy, fat priest, who taught church history, and he said, you can always remember the date of the Council of Nicaea because it's the same as my weight, 325.
Oh, my God.
That's a true story.
So was it Athanasius that developed the creed himself, or was it a collective?
It was a collective effort. He probably had the most influence on the wording of the creed. And it's the same creed we say at Sunday Mass, yes.
Wasn't the creed modified to add the last Holy Spirit?
The filioque and the Spirit. The Son proceeds
So
from
that was added after Nicaea?
It was, but it was done by the Pope, and the Pope had the authority to do it. And the Pope didn't add any theology, he just clarified what it was actually saying.
Also, wasn't Arian a monk?
Arius,
Arius?
he was a priest.
He was a
He
priest.
was a priest, a diocesan priest, he was not a monk.
Okay. It seemed like a lot of the heretics were educated by the church.
That is the eternal plague of the church. You educate someone and then they turn into a heretic. So,
You think
Luther was
yeah.
Who started it?
Yeah. People have free will, so we can give someone a treasure, which is the faith, and people have free will, they can choose to deny it, at least parts of it. So, yes.
But one thing about the creed, why do we have the two variations? You know, like
The Apostles'
Creed.
Creed.
I know in my church we say the short version, and then even another one in Scott so.
Okay, here's the difference. The Apostles' Creed is the older one, and it's a briefer summary. It was developed by the apostles and their successors, and it's shorter, it's more summarized, it's older, and so the church attached that to the rosary. That's what we say when we say the rosary. We say the Apostles' Creed. The Nicene Creed, like I said, it's not adding any new teachings, but it is clarifying certain teachings in order to combat heresy specifically. So it's longer, it's specifically targeted against the Arian heresy, and it's more clarifying. And the church chose to attach that to Sunday Mass. Okay? So it's later in date, it's more specific, it's longer. It's not adding new teaching, it's just being more specific. Here's an example. I could say, Jesus is God, and that's true. Then Dusty could get up and say, Jesus is God, the Son of God, the third person of the Trinity. Okay, so he said something longer, more specific, more detailed, but we both said the same thing, which is true.
So that the priest has the option in the Mass to do either or?
Yes, he does. The Missal says that the priest can, if he wants to, say the Apostles' Creed instead of the Nicene Creed. But very few priests actually take that option up. So,
Thank you.
yes.
do you think Arianism is allowed today?
Yes, it is. It is in the sense that we call them modernists. They call themselves Christian, but they don't really believe Jesus is God. If you ask them, they would say, well, Jesus was a really nice guy, really good teacher, but he's not God. And that is a very common belief. I would say the majority of American and European Christians who still have some belief in God, because a lot of them don't, I would say the majority of them have fallen into a form of Arian heresy. Because, like I said, most of them would say, well, Jesus was a great guy, probably the best guy, but just not God.
So like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses also?
They have adopted a form of Arian heresy, yes. Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, they incorporated a lot of Arian theology into their theology, yes. Did you have a question in the back?
Yeah, so you see, is that, so the Arian heresies seemingly still have effects on a lot of people in the world today?
Yes, but for a different reason. Modern people, they don't like Jesus' moral teachings. They find them too harsh. And so, here's the problem though. If Jesus is God, then that means we're bound to follow his moral teachings. Modern people don't want to do that. They don't like what Jesus said, if you look at a woman lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. Modern people don't like to hear that. So modern people, their way out of Jesus' strict moral teachings is just to say he wasn't God. Because then, if he's not God, that means you don't have to follow. You don't have to follow what he
Doesn't carry as
says.
much authority.
Yeah. So Arius, that was not Arius' position though. Arius never denied the moral teachings of the church. Arius would still say adultery was wrong. He just denied the divinity of Christ, But modern man though wants to have the freedom to do whatever he wants. He does not want to be held, especially in sexual matters. He does not want to be bound by Christ's teaching. That's why there's such an urge to deny the divinity of Christ among modern people.
Well,
So,
going into details, it seems to me that we've kind of got one now, this whole idea of annulment and going and receive the sacraments.
that is a whole different question for which I don't have any time. But I have actually, I'm using up some of your break time.